Muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon to each and every one of you. I would like to, first of all, thank Mr. Kimball and Mr. Rafael Gutierrez, who extended this invitation to me from this university to participate in this important symposium. I promise you, and first of all, I give you permission to sleep during these 10 minutes, and I promise to wake you up when I'm done. I would like to speak somewhat about the relationship between the church and the state in the Dominican Republic and how our university, in response to the church, has participated in the resolution of conflicts in our country. Hearing the different expositions from our colleagues in Latin America about the constitution of each one of their countries, we realize that each one of them, except for a few, mention the Catholicism that took place and the recognition of the Catholic Church, and then the respect of the freedom of religion of its people. In order to be able to understand this, and specifically the case of the Dominican Republic, without a doubt, we have to go back to the people that colonized us in 1492. Which historically meant, and from the point of view of anthropology and religious sociology, on which I would like to base my arguments, which means what the encounter between our indigenous people and the Europeans had expanded and opened up the world to us. We, as Latin Americans, now had a new vision that there were other people in this world and that there were other continents. Another important point is the moment that the colonizers from Spain arrived, led by an Italian. And that was the expulsion of the last Muslim and Jews from Spain. In January of 1492, this expulsion battle took place. Therefore, those that arrived at our country, the Dominican Republic, firstly were marked by this time of Christianity. When Christopher Columbus arrived, he was the representative of the Pope when he arrived in our lands. He not only represented the crown, but he also represented the church. This process of evangelization took place during the second trip of Christopher Columbus, in which they brought well-formed clerics. That is an advantage that we had in Latin America, particularly in the Caribbean islands. The church officials that arrived were academics that tried to teach what they had learned in their various universities. Many of them were actually great professors. The cross arrived with Columbus, and Christianity had arrived. During this process of evangelization of the Indian or indigenous people, Christianity was accepted in two ways, either voluntarily or by obligation or forced. I either accept it freely to be Christian, if not, I would be forced. The indigenous people were forced to go to Mass. We know, because of history, that 40 years later, after Christopher Columbus arrived to the Dominican Republic, there were only about 600 Aborigines that were left, and there are still some obscure facts that in 1492, there were between 2 and 3 million Aborigines, and in 40 years, there were only 600 left. During this mission of evangelization, the universities arose. In 1538, we founded the University of Santo Tomás Aquino by the Fathers Dominicus. This tradition continues. Today in the Dominican Republic, there are 7 Catholic universities, 2 of evangelical denominations, and 3 that are secular, but within their halls, they permit religious practices, and some of them do have churches inside them. What else affected the fact that the Dominican people have recognized church and state? These first church leaders that had arrived were pro-life. In the sermon of Father Montesinos in 1511, there was a new period in the history of this relationship. In his discourse, Ego clamanti vox in deserto, which means that he is the voice of God that speaks from the desert. This sermon, it spoke of how Aborigines were then granted their human rights. Another important aspect in terms of the black race, speaking of Bartolomé de las Casas, in order to avoid that the indigenous people continue to die, brought Africans from the Congo, and they are also forced to practice Catholicism. And this was done, one, because it was a matter of survival. Africans had in their homes Catholic images. When a missionary would come, they would immediately hang it up. And when they left, they would hang up their own gods. And this brought a conflict that to this day continues to be applied. During the process of independence, Catholicism is still present with the participation of Christians. So the symbols of the state of the Dominican Republic are marked by the religious affiliation that yesterday my brother Mariano Germán spoke of in his exposition. The shield with God, country, and liberty, the flag with the cross, and it says that you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And now to jump, what is to speak about the Concord of 1544, signed between the dictator Trujillo, because this is a case that up until this day is still discussed when we speak of the relationship between the church and the state. The first article, it says that Apostolic Roman religion continues to be the religion of the Republican nation, Dominican Republican nation, and shall enjoy the rights and prerogatives in accordance with divine law and canon law. Here, the church assumes its role as the thing that gives social stability to the state. And at the end of this government in 1971, there was a tension between church and state, in which a bishop would protest against dictatorship, his church would be burned down, and 6 months later, the dictator fell. After that, in the Dominican Republic, there was a belief that any government that opposes the church would fall. How we contributed to this stability? There must be a relationship of respect. There must be active participation within the various institutions, and the church is a mediator in social conflicts. that is done through the Center for Resolution of Conflicts that is within our university. The Pontificia University carries or is the leader in resolving problems, especially when it comes to political problems. And we have avoided large conflicts because of this Center of Conflict Resolution. Also, within our university, there is a Council for Economic Stabilization of the Dominican Republic, where a priest is head of this council, and he provides counsel to the politicians when it comes to matters of economy. And this priest is the only one in the country that has an official state job in order to hold this call. What are the perspectives going forward? Or what are the threats? The growing separation of church and state, voices that are calling for this separation, or the secular state, trends to remove all religious things from public space. What are their opportunities? There's increased awareness of the Christian life, increased sense of ecumenism, organization of non-Catholic Christian churches because of the new Constitution of 2010, where participation is granted and it is called for regulation of state, particularly when it comes to those things related to marriage, which has both value civilly and religiously. Until 2010, those marriages performed in churches that were non-Catholic were not recognized. There's also participation of Christians in the media. It's more and more active, and the opening for the young to this religious phenomenon, which makes it so that the state must recognize all churches so that they can continue to work towards stabilization of our country. Thank you.